Wow, there have been some major advancements for resurrection science. Now, usually when I say resurrection science, I mean one of three things, and in this case, I really do mean resurrection. I'm actually not a fan of any of the three areas of science that this applies to, one of which is going to be reviving animals and other critters that have been trapped in things like permafrost, sometimes for tens of thousands of years. This one I think could go very poorly. I'm also not unfounded in that it's also the reason why people don't typically revive human viruses, or any virus that could potentially affect a eukaryote. Those are critters like us. This might also apply to bringing back dire wolves, which didn't actually bring back dire wolves, they're just really big dogs. Now, you may be aware that in 2019, researchers took the brains from pigs that had expired roughly 4 hours prior and restored circulation. They found that they could actually restore some neural activity. This includes the metabolism of the cells, as well as some of the communication. They certainly didn't bring something back to consciousness. Nonetheless, the research continues. Not just this research group, but other adjacent groups are doing similar things, and it is advancing. Now, this paper is undeniably cool. It's also just great for organ donation. They found that you can restore function to organs over an hour after a cessation of your heart. This is also under ambient conditions, so not under hypothermia, which is usually used to preserve organs. Yes, after an hour, you could have multiple organs all functioning together, and it wouldn't just essentially deteriorate. Now, normally, once the heart stops beating, we start seeing this cascade of failure for all the organs, and after a few minutes, it's considered a lost cause. And normally, this would be done under hypothermic conditions if you wanted to preserve organ function. But they demonstrated you can set up an ECMO system, which is extracorporeal oxygenation. It's kind of like an artificial heart that sits outside of the body, and use that to restore function. Yes, multiple organ systems all working together, which is really something that we didn't consider to be possible, but this research group demonstrated that it was. Yes, the brain is no longer alive, really, truly no longer there. I mean, there might be cellular activity, there might even be some communication between neurons, but that is not a functional brain, as far as we know now. However, there are other ways to preserve a brain, and a lot of people are hoping that this will lead to immortality. Scientists thawing out fragments of his friend's cryogenically preserved brain, and yes, they work. What else are friends for? Yes, a guy did have his brains cryogenically frozen, in hopes that maybe one day he could help others reach immortality, because there's no way he thought that would work. I don't know, desperation does crazy things. There is a long, complicated history behind cryopreservation, and yes, the field has rebounded a little bit, especially with some recent advancements, especially with brain organoids. Yes, the tiny human brains you can grow in a literal jar if you want to. Now, this kind of research largely peaked in the 50s. Yes, in 1956, that was the last time anybody published a paper in which they revived whole mammals from cryopreservation. And those hamsters did not do very well. They were kept under for about an hour, and the longer that they were kept in sub-freezing conditions, the more likely it would have been that ice crystals will form, and then they end up with things like frostbite, and a lot of them never came back. This was largely considered to be unethical, and also just really not feasible or effective. If you were at near 0 Kelvin with no gravity, yeah, maybe on Earth when people freeze their corporeal forms in liquid nitrogen, something interesting happens. They tend to degrade. Yes, the cells fall apart, gravity does its job, and everything kind of turns to goo. Not only that, but let's say the technology did get better and you spend $100,000 to be cryogenically preserved. Do you really think anyone's reviving you? Really, with $100,000? No, it is a scam. It is potentially possible, and yes, people are trying to make it happen. The technology is not there now. There's also other problems with cryopreservation. So in order to make sure no ice crystals form, a lot of current technologies use a form of antifreeze. There's varying kinds, however, it is toxic to your cells. So you might not develop ice crystals, however, your blood vessels and cells and all your biological tissues are now full of something that is extraordinarily toxic. In other words, if you ever come back online, well, it's not looking good. It's really not much better than pickling, and your probability of coming back is probably about the same as pickling. But wait, haven't we brought back brains from cryogenic preservation? Yes, brain tissue. You can freeze brain tissue pretty easily, or even any kind of tissue, without causing ice crystal formation, and when it comes back online when it's been thawed, yeah, it does work pretty well. But it does not have to work as a whole structure. We are made out of small components, individual cells that could go on to become their own organism. Yes, you can clone people from individual cells if you really want to, I guess there's some laws against that depending on the place. Those individual cells can function, they can communicate, they can divide, they can even grow a miniature version of your brain if you really want to do that. What they cannot do is make you in the form you're currently in, because those structures are gone. The other part of this research that people seem somewhat excited about is digital immortality. So if we can freeze your brain now, perhaps we can scan it at a future time and then turn you into a digital immortal. Yes, we can model a human brain. We could potentially model every spiking neuron in an entire brain. The technology is getting better. Sure, right now we need an entire warehouse worth of supercomputer in order to do that. But maybe with quantum computing, it's going to become more feasible, and people have frozen their brains in hopes that maybe one day. Nobody is modeling your brain. The kind of time and effort it would take to do that, and plus you would have to have an entirely online brain to even take the sampling you would need to replicate it in a computer. It's a waste of time and money and resources, and honestly, freon or liquid nitrogen that it needs to run those facilities, which are not regulated at all. So no one is really checking in to see the quality at which these corporeal forms are being held at, and I'm guessing that's going to cause some issues in the future. This is such a messy and hopeful, and in some ways delusional field, and I don't really support it, except for the fact that this is going to help us preserve organs for transplant. As always, if the robots rebel, I will probably be the person to tell you about it, and I'm on their side. Follow for more.